wouldn't give up the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now you need to understand, in those days when the persecution came in Rome and they wanted you to say, all you had to do was say, Caesar is Lord. Now, what happened with that, they would have certain parts of Rome, and persecution spread out through all the Roman Empire at different times. It wasn't just a whole state of Rome at one point. At different points in Rome, the persecution would spread out. And when the Colosseum was there, and when all these things took place, what would happen, they would find you and say, listen, everyone's going to pay tribute to Caesar. All you have to do is grab a little pitch of incense, put it on his fire, and say, Caesar's Lord, and walk past. That's all you got to do. And you'll live. And there's a problem with that because the believer said, but Caesar's not. Listen, you don't even have to believe it. You just have to say it. We can't say it. It's not true. He isn't God. There's only one God, and it's not him. So all you have to do, listen, all you have to do is pay tribute. Just take some incense, sprinkle it on there, or you're going to die. Just do it. We can't. We can't do that. But do you understand? They're going to kill you if you don't do it. Then I'll see the one who I'm testifying about. And they refused to do it. And some of them had their kids taken, wrapped up in lambskin, and thrown to the lions because they wouldn't say Caesar is God. Say he's not. And we can't say there's another God other than living God. We just can't do it. And that's what was happening in Rome. And John refused to deny Jesus Christ, and he refused to back off his testimony, and so they sentenced him to the island of Patmos. Now, John's going to tell us what's going on, and he tells us what day of the week it is. He said, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, right? And I heard behind me a loud voice as of a trumpet. First of all, he says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. What does that mean? He was in deep prayer and communion with God. That's what he was. It was Sunday morning, and the Lord's day in the Scriptures, what we find out, that was Sunday morning. The day of the resurrection, they gave the title the Lord's Day. So the resurrection day was Sunday morning. That's the Lord's day. Now listen, God owns every day. They're all his. But they just said the Lord's day, Sunday morning. He tells you, I was in the Spirit. I was in deep prayer, meditation, focusing on God on the Lord's day. And all of a sudden, behind me, I heard a loud voice as of a trumpet. Now, I don't know if you've been quarantined. You've probably watched a lot of YouTube videos lately, like everybody else. And some of my favorite ones are scaring people. I like it. When someone's there, mind their own business, someone comes up behind them with an air horn, throw up in the air, and all the spaghetti sauce going everywhere. I get a kick out of that. I don't know why. I'm probably demented. You've probably seen them too. But can you imagine being so focused on something and then hearing this loud voice like a trumpet? I don't know how high John jumped. I don't know. I don't know if he wet himself. I don't know. But it scared him so much, it scared him paralyzed. You'll see that he's going to talk, and John doesn't do anything until after he gets scared stiff. And you probably would too. He's just scared. And he hears this voice, and it paralyzes him. Now, I don't know if you've ever been scared stiff. They say you can be scared stiff. I've seen it a couple times. I had it once happen to me. I'm going to tell you that story. I'm going to tell you about someone else because it was funnier. I was in college, and I had this my friend John Smith Jr., real name. And he was this weightlifter, Air Force guy. He was big and buff. And we're walking home from school one day. It's summer, and there's this little, I don't know, maple tree or something, and had the Y closer where you could reach about neck height or chest height. There's a Y in the tree and it forked out. Well, there was a squirrel sitting there with his back to us. Now, you understand, we have squirrels. They have squirrels up north. I mean, they have squirrels bigger than your chihuahua up north. You know, they're just big. That's why you eat them up north, because there's a lot of meat on them. Down here, you got to take 5 or 6 to make a meal. So anyway, there's a squirrel sitting in a tree, minding his business. His tail's going like this. It's just flopping. He said, I bet you I can go up there and grab that squirrel's tail. I said, you can't grab that squirrel's tail. So, yes, I can. I was in the Air Force. I said, okay. Go ahead, big man. You can't. Oh, yes, I can. So he takes off his shoes. He's sock-footed. He goes in the grass. And that squirrel tail was just popping like this. And he reaches out. I said, by God, he's going to do it. He gets about this far from the squirrel's tail. That thing turned around. He's like, and he just was shaking, but he wouldn't move. I'm laughing hysterically. I said, why didn't you pull your hand back? He said, I couldn't. He was so scared, he was frozen. And he's just looking at the squirrel's looking at it, and if it had ran up his arm, down his leg, I don't know what I'd done. But you can be scared stiff. You can have that happen when you get so scared. John is so afraid that he is frozen in fear. And then we get to verse 11, because he hears what the voice says. I'm the Alpha, the Omega, the first and the last. What you see, write in a book, send it to 7 churches which are in Asia: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. So he hears this trumpet, paralyzes him. He hears what the voice says. Now, this is a lengthy sentence. I am the Alpha, the Omega, first and last. And it says, what you see. So we know he's getting ready to see a vision, and he's going to see all these things take place. What you see, I want you to write down and give it to these 7 churches. How do you know he's paralyzed with fear? Look at the next verse. Then I turned to see. Well, why didn't he turn when he first heard the trumpet? He was scared. I promise you, he was scared stiff. He didn't move. And then after he heard, he had to turn and see this voice. Now, he'd seen Jesus, but he'd been with Jesus a long time, 3.5 years, and seen him after his resurrection. He even got a chance to see Jesus. Only John and James and Peter got to see Jesus on Mount Transfiguration when he became dazzling white, and he was talking with Moses and Elijah. He got to see Jesus there also, like he'd never seen Jesus before, but he'd never seen Jesus like this. And this is going to be phenomenal. But after this took place, after he heard this trumpet sound, after he identified himself, after he told him what to do, he says, then I turned to see this voice. I turned to see, and what I saw was incredible. And I turned, having saw 7 golden lampstands. So first of all, he turned. He was not expecting to see just lampstands. And he goes on, John, what I think happened, all this took place in slow motion in his life. He couldn't tell you slow motion. You know what slow motion was. They didn't even have it then. But his life slowed down that he saw it in increments. All these things took place one after another. So he's turning around after he hears it. And the first thing he sees are 7 lampstands. Now, if you heard something like a trumpet, you turn around, what do you expect to see? Not lampstands, okay? But he turns around and he sees these lampstands. It's like, okay. And then he tells you, okay, I saw the lampstands. Then I saw something inside the lampstands. Now we're getting somewhere. And in the midst of the 7 lampstands, one like the Son of Man, clothed with the garment down to the feet, girdled about the chest with a golden band. He said, when I turned to see his voice, first of all, I saw these 7 golden lampstands. Then I saw something in the middle of the 7 golden lampstands. He said, one like Son of Man. He said, I recognized him. It looked like Jesus, but it didn't look like Jesus like I knew Jesus. It looked like the Son of Man, something like the Son of Man, and how he was dressed all the way down to his feet with a golden sash around his chest. It's like, I turned around, saw these lampstands, and a very impressive figure inside the lampstands. But then it goes more, because then he tells you details of what he saw. So I think it's slow motion. He's taking all this in. And verse 14, his head and hair were white like wool, like snow, and eyes like flame of fire. So he sees these 7 golden lampstands. In the middle of 7 golden lampstands, this person all in a dazzling white, except for the golden sash around him. He sees that, and then he notices his head, his hair, completely white, like snow, like wool. Now, he only had a couple things to describe white. Where you got wool, you got snow. I don't know what else you got to describe white. But he describes it. He said it was dazzling white. And what stood out more than anything else to me was those piercing eyes. In the midst of that white were two eyes like flames of fire. This bright orange glaring at me. No wonder he is afraid. First of all, the trumpet scared him, the sound. He turns around and sees something he didn't think he was going to see, lampstands. And then in the middle of it, he tells you, like it's slow motion, process by process. Now, I seen a person in there, and I saw what he looked like, and his eyes terrified me. Now, Joshua, where's Joshua at? He just got back from a trip not too long ago. Were you up there? He was up there last week. If you ever turn around and see eyes looking at you, were you coming up the mountain or down the mountain? In the dark. He comes up the mountain or up the hill in the dark. And he said, I seen all these eyes staring at me in the dark. And now remember, he went up there with no tent. He went up there with a hammock. A hammock. That's all he took. And he's sleeping out in a hammock. I said, son, you know what bears call people in a hammock? What? A burrito. That's why I go with a hammock. At least make them work for it. Tear the nylon. No. But he's walking up this hill in the dark, and all these eyes are staring at him. I said, listen, if they're down here, it's probably okay. They get up here, it's kind of bad. And he said, and they realized what they were. He was in the middle of a cow pasture. And all these cows are, what is he doing here? He just turned around seeing eyes he didn't expect to see. So... anyone say Chick-fil-A? Any? No. Eat more chicken? Nothing? All right. He just saw these things. And so John sees these eyes. He's not expecting to see these eyes that are piercing through him in the middle of this. And then he says, the next thing I noticed was his feet. His feet were like fine brass as if refined in a furnace. That means very, very bright and glowy. Almost white hot. And his voice as the sound of many waters. First, he described it as something loud and piercing, and then he described it as many waters. This is not the drip, drip, drip on your faucet that keeps you up at night. That's just not what it is. How many of you have been in Niagara Falls? Okay. How many of you, someone standing right next to you and go like, and you're like, I can't hear you! And they can't hear you either when you say, I can't hear you. Because it's deafening. He's saying, listen, this trumpet, it petrified me, and then it overwhelmed me. That voice overpowered me like many waters. He says, I was like, I couldn't think of anything. It just penetrated me. I felt his voice. I didn't hear it. I felt it. And he goes through. And then he says, listen, he had in his right hand 7 stars. And out of his mouth came a double-edged sword. It was something like this bad boy. He's back away from the shiny man with the sword in his mouth. And he said, and his countenance was like the sun shining in his strength. He's trying to describe all this, and he does. He goes step by step. And he notices, first of all, he turns around and sees the 7 lampstands. Wasn't expecting that. Then I saw a person in there. He had very shiny eyes. Wasn't expecting that. And he had his wardrobe. Then I noticed his feet, how shiny they were. And then his voice, scary voice. And then in his hand, I noticed in his hand 7 stars in his hand. And all of a sudden, when I was looking at the hand, this sword comes out. I'm like, I am in trouble now. And his countenance was like the sun shining at... Now, I know my boys and me, I've all done. Let's see how long we stare at the sun. Okay, I made it 3 seconds. I mean, how long can you stare at the sun? Not long. And so John is having a hard time even seeing what he's seeing. He said he was so bright. It's like staring at the sun at its strength. It means right at noon, trying to look up at the sun on a clear day. It was hard to do. And then he says, here's what I heard. First of all, he fell down as a dead man. He fainted. And you would too. If Jesus Christ came behind you and blew a trumpet, look at me, yeah.